The moment the elevator doors opened, Evelyn Carter realized her marriage had already died. The soft ding echoed through the marble lobby of the Blackwood Grand Hotel at 1:47 a.m., cold and metallic against the silence of Manhattan after midnight. Evelyn stood frozen beside the gold-trimmed elevator numbers, one hand supporting the curve of her 8-month pregnant belly while the other tightened around the strap of her designer handbag. Her feet ached inside low beige heels swollen from carrying extra weight for the past 34 weeks. But she had refused to go home without seeing her husband first. Damian Blackwood had promised he would leave the charity fundraiser early. He had promised they would finally spend one quiet evening together before the baby arrived. Instead, the elevator opened, and there he was. Billionaire CEO Damian Blackwood stepped out laughing softly beside Vanessa Sinclair, the same woman tabloids had called the rising queen of New York luxury fashion. Vanessa's sleek blonde hair rested perfectly against the shoulder of Damian's navy cashmere coat, and her manicured hands still lingered near his chest as though she belonged there. The smell of expensive perfume drifted through the lobby seconds before Damian even looked up. For one brief moment, all three of them stood perfectly still beneath the crystal chandelier hanging overhead. Evelyn watched her husband's smile disappear. Not guilt. Not shame. Irritation. That hurt more than anything. "Evelyn," Damian said flatly, loosening his tie as if he'd merely run into an employee after hours. "What are you doing here?" The question nearly made her laugh. She had spent 7 years building his life beside him. 7 years attending galas, smiling beside magazine covers, hosting investor dinners, pretending she didn't notice the growing distance between them every time his phone lit up after midnight. And now he looked at her like she was the inconvenience. Vanessa crossed her arms slowly, her diamond bracelet glimmering under the chandelier lights. "I thought she was home," she murmured, not quietly enough. Evelyn felt the baby shift hard against her ribs, a sudden movement that stole her breath for half a second. Her doctor had warned her about stress. Elevated blood pressure. Reduced rest. But stress had become her normal months ago. The signs had been everywhere. Late night. Board meetings. Weekend business trips. Calls that stopped the moment she entered the room. Damian finally stepped forward, his polished shoes clicking softly across the marble floor. "Don't start another scene," he muttered under his breath. Another scene. As though heartbreak was some embarrassing hobby she refused to let go of. Evelyn stared at the faint lipstick stain near his collar. Not dramatic. Not obvious. Just enough to confirm what her instincts had already known for months. Around them, the hotel lobby remained unnervingly quiet except for the distant hum of jazz music drifting from the rooftop lounge upstairs. A valet pushed a luggage cart through the revolving doors outside while snow fell gently over Fifth Avenue. Somewhere across the city, millions of lights still glowed through Manhattan windows. But inside Evelyn's chest, something had gone dark. Damian reached for the elevator button again. "We'll talk tomorrow," he said, already done with the conversation. But Evelyn didn't move. Slowly, she opened her handbag and touched the thick envelope hidden inside beneath a folder of medical papers. Divorce documents. Signed 3 hours earlier. Damian had no idea that while he spent the evening wrapped in another woman's attention, forensic accountants were already reviewing his offshore transfers. Anonymous files had already been delivered to federal investigators downtown. And before sunrise, the empire Damian Blackwood spent 15 years building would begin collapsing piece by piece. Damian did not notice Evelyn leave the hotel. He was already turning back toward Vanessa, already checking the flood of notifications vibrating across his phone screen as though billion-dollar deals mattered more than the woman carrying his child. Outside, icy wind swept through Fifth Avenue while black SUVs rolled past glowing storefronts decorated for Christmas. Evelyn stood alone beneath the hotel awning for several seconds, trying to steady her breathing. The city. Lights blurred in her vision. Across the street, a giant digital billboard displayed Damian Blackwood's face beside the words "America's youngest self-made billionaire." She stared at it silently while snowflakes melted against her dark wool coat. 2 years ago, that image would have made her proud. Now it felt like looking at a stranger. Her driver hurried toward her holding an umbrella. "Mrs. Blackwood, are you all right?" Evelyn forced a small nod and slid into the back seat of the town car. The leather felt cold against her hands. As the vehicle pulled away from the curb, she looked down at the envelope resting on her lap. Thick cream-colored paper. Gold-embossed lettering from Manhattan Family Court. The final signature still looked unreal even to her. 7 years reduced to a stack of documents. Her phone buzzed softly. Nathan Hale. Evelyn answered immediately. "Did he see the papers?" Nathan asked calmly. In the background she could hear keyboards clicking and printers running nonstop. It was nearly 2 in the morning, but nobody in Nathan's office had gone home. "Not yet," Evelyn whispered. "Good," Nathan replied. "Then we stay ahead of him." Evelyn closed her eyes as the car moved through traffic. Stay ahead of him. Those words would have terrified her 6 months ago. Back then, Damien controlled everything. The penthouse. The companies. The bank accounts. Even the conversations inside their marriage somehow revolved around his schedule, his stress, his image. Whenever she questioned him, he made her feel irrational. Emotional. Difficult. "You are overthinking things again, Evelyn. You are too sensitive. Do not embarrass me in public." The phrases repeated in her mind like old scars reopening one by one. But something had changed the night she discovered the offshore transfers. She had been searching for a missing insurance document in Damien's home office when a hidden folder appeared on his laptop screen. Dozens of transactions. Millions of dollars quietly moved into private accounts connected to shell corporations overseas. And buried between those files sat luxury apartment payments registered under Vanessa Sinclair's name. That was the moment Evelyn stopped crying. The moment survival became strategy. Nathan had called it financial betrayal. Federal investigators would call it something much worse. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Nathan. 3 words only. "It starts now." At that exact moment, somewhere downtown, encrypted files began arriving inside government inboxes while emergency legal motions were electronically submitted to Manhattan courts. And 42 floors above Central Park, Damien Blackwood stepped into his penthouse believing tomorrow would be another ordinary day. At 6:04 a.m., the first phone call woke Damien Blackwood. The sharp vibration of his cell phone rattled against the glass nightstand beside his king-sized bed while pale winter sunlight crept through the penthouse windows overlooking Central Park. Damien groaned softly and reached for the phone without opening his eyes. Unknown number. He almost ignored it until the second line started ringing too. Then the third. By the time he sat upright in bed, 4 incoming calls were flashing across his screen simultaneously. "What now?" he muttered under his breath before answering the first call. "Mr. Blackwood, this is Franklin National Banking Security Division." The woman's voice sounded tense. Professional. Careful. "We need to inform you that several corporate accounts connected to Blackwood Global have been temporarily frozen pending federal review." Damien blinked hard. "What?" Silence filled the room for half a second. Then another phone started ringing. "Sir, there are also emergency restrictions involving overseas transfers connected to your Cayman accounts." Damien immediately stood up. "That is impossible." His voice sharpened instantly. Controlled anger. The kind boardrooms feared. "I want legal on the line right now." He disconnected before the woman could finish speaking. Another call came in. Then another. His chief financial officer. Head of legal. Investor relations. Damien shoved open the bedroom doors and walked barefoot across the cold marble floor toward the living room where giant television screens lined the far wall. The second he turned one on, his stomach tightened. Breaking news flashed across every financial channel in bright red banners. Federal investigators reviewing possible financial misconduct involving Blackwood Global Holdings. Anonymous whistleblower evidence submitted overnight. Shares expected to open sharply lower at market bell. Damien stared at the screen in disbelief while reporters repeated his name over and over again. His empire. His reputation. 15 years of carefully engineered power unraveling before breakfast. Damien? Vanessa's sleepy voice drifted from the hallway behind him. She appeared wearing one of his white dress shirts, confusion written across her face as she noticed the televisions. What is happening? Damien ignored her. His phone buzzed again. This time it was the chairman of the board. Damien answered immediately. Tell me this is temporary, he snapped. But the older man's voice sounded colder than Damien had ever heard before. Federal agents are requesting internal financial records. Investors are panicking. Half the board believes someone inside the company leaked evidence. Damien's jaw tightened. Then the chairman delivered the sentence that finally made real fear enter the room. And your wife filed for divorce at 3:12 this morning. Everything stopped. The city noise outside faded into silence. Even Vanessa looked suddenly nervous. Damien slowly lowered the phone from his ear as memories flashed through his mind. Evelyn standing quietly in the hotel lobby. The envelope in her handbag. The strange calm in her eyes. Not heartbreak. Not desperation. Preparation. Then another message appeared across his television screen. Blackwood Global stock down 31% in pre-market trading. Analysts predict catastrophic losses. Damien looked toward the massive windows overlooking Manhattan, but for the first time in years, the city below no longer felt like it belonged to him. By 7:15 a.m., Blacktown cars were lining up outside Blackwood Global headquarters while reporters crowded behind metal barricades in the freezing Manhattan air. Camera flashes exploded nonstop against the mirrored glass tower that once symbolized Damien Blackwood's untouchable success. Inside the executive boardroom on the 42nd floor, tension hung heavier than the storm clouds rolling over the Hudson River. Damien stood at the head of the conference table gripping his cell phone so tightly his knuckles turned pale. Find out who leaked those files, he demanded. I want names before the market opens. Nobody answered immediately. That was what unsettled him most. These people used to move the second he spoke. Now they avoided eye contact altogether. The chief legal officer finally slid a folder across the polished black table. Federal investigators are requesting access to internal accounting servers, she said carefully. And there is another problem. Damien opened the folder impatiently. His expression hardened the moment he saw Evelyn's name printed across the top page. Emergency petition for divorce. Temporary asset restraining order. Request for full financial disclosure. Damien laughed once under his breath. Cold. Disbelieving. She thinks she can destroy me with paperwork? But the legal officer did not laugh with him. Sir, she said quietly. She already started. Silence settled over the room again, while financial news channels played muted broadcasts across the giant screens mounted behind him. Blackwood Global stock had dropped another 18% in less than an hour. Investors were pulling out. Online headlines multiplied every minute. Billionaire under federal review. Secret offshore transfers exposed. Wife files high-profile divorce amid scandal. Damien slammed the folder shut. Where is Evelyn now? Nobody knew. That answer irritated him more than the investigation itself. For years, Evelyn's entire world revolved around his schedule, his dinners, his appearances. She had always been predictable. Quiet. Loyal. But suddenly she was invisible. Untouchable. Across town, Evelyn sat near the window of a private recovery suite at St. Vincent Medical Center while soft snow continued falling over the city outside. Her doctor insisted she rest after the stress from the previous night triggered dangerous contractions. Machines beeped steadily beside her bed while warm morning sunlight touched the edge of the cream-colored blanket draped across her lap. Nathan. Hale stood nearby reviewing documents on a tablet. The board is turning on him faster than expected, he said calmly. Evelyn remained silent for several seconds. She watched nurses moving through the hallway outside her room while distant televisions replayed footage of Damien entering headquarters surrounded by security. Once upon a time, seeing him under pressure would have broken her heart. Now she only felt tired. Nathan lowered the tablet. You should know something, he added carefully. The investigators did not freeze those accounts because of the affair. Evelyn slowly looked up. Then why? Nathan's expression darkened slightly. Because someone inside his company has been stealing from investors for years. The room suddenly felt colder despite the heat running through the hospital vents. And for the first time since signing the divorce papers, Evelyn realized Damien might not just lose his marriage. He could lose everything. At 9:32 a.m., the opening bell on Wall Street rang like an execution countdown for Blackwood Global. Traders shouted across the exchange floor while giant electronic boards flashed red numbers faster than analysts could explain them. 47% down. Then 52. Then 58. Financial reporters stood outside the stock exchange speaking breathlessly into microphones as clips of Damien Blackwood replayed across national television beside words like scandal, fraud, and collapse. Inside his private office, Damien ripped another call away from his ear and threw the phone onto the leather sofa hard enough to make Vanessa flinch. Every single one of them is panicking, he snapped while pacing across the room. Investors, banks, board members. They are acting like I am already guilty. Vanessa crossed her arms tightly near the windows overlooking Manhattan. For the first time since meeting Damien, she looked uncertain instead of confident. Then tell them it is not true, she said carefully. Damien stopped walking. Slowly, he looked toward her. That pause lasted too long. Vanessa's expression changed instantly. Damien, she whispered, what exactly did you do? Before he could answer, another notification lit up. Across the television screens mounted inside the office. Federal agents entering Blackwood Global headquarters. Employees carrying boxes out of accounting departments. Anonymous internal witness cooperating with investigators. Damien grabbed the remote and muted the sound, but silence only made the images worse. Somewhere downstairs, protesters had already gathered outside the building chanting about corruption and stolen pensions. He could hear muffled sirens echoing through the streets below. The empire he built suddenly sounded fragile. Across town, Evelyn sat quietly beside the hospital window while Nathan spread dozens of financial documents across a small conference table near her bed. Offshore accounts. Real estate transfers. Shell companies registered under fake consulting firms. Evelyn stared at the paperwork in disbelief. I knew he was hiding money, she said softly. But this… Nathan nodded once. It goes much deeper than divorce. He slid another document toward her. This one carried Vanessa Sinclair's name connected to a luxury penthouse in Miami purchased 6 months earlier through one of Damien's private subsidiaries. Evelyn looked down at the numbers printed across the page. $12 million. Paid in full. Her stomach tightened painfully. Not because of jealousy anymore. Because she suddenly realized how long Damien had been planning a second life while pretending to prepare for fatherhood beside her. Nathan lowered his voice. Evelyn, there is something else you need to know. He opened a secure audio file on his tablet. Damien's voice filled the room instantly. Calm. Cold. Move the funds before my wife notices anything. Evelyn froze completely. The recording continued. If this divorce ever happens, she walks away with nothing. The room fell silent after the audio ended except for the steady heartbeat monitor beside Evelyn's bed. Nathan watched her carefully, expecting tears. Instead, Evelyn slowly placed one hand over her stomach and looked back toward the snowy Manhattan skyline outside. Then he underestimated the wrong woman, she said quietly. By noon, helicopters circled above Blackwood Global headquarters while every major financial network in America carried the same story. Reporters crowded the sidewalks shoulder to shoulder beneath gray winter skies, shouting questions whenever executives entered or exited the building. Once, Damien Blackwood would have walked through that chaos with absolute confidence. Today, he remained trapped inside his office watching his empire bleed billions of dollars in real time. The stock ticker running across the television screen felt almost unreal now. 64% down. Analysts predicting bankruptcy exposure. Emergency board meetings underway. Damien loosened his tie for the third time in an hour, but the pressure inside the room only kept tightening. "Sir, the board wants an immediate statement," his assistant said nervously from the doorway. Damien did not answer. He stood near the windows staring down at Manhattan traffic 20 floors below while sirens echoed faintly through the streets. His reflection in the glass barely looked familiar anymore. Then his private phone buzzed once. "Evelyn." Damien answered instantly. "Where are you?" he demanded before she could speak. Silence met him first. Calm silence. The kind that unnerved powerful men more than screaming ever could. "Safe," Evelyn finally replied. Her voice sounded tired but steady. "What exactly are you trying to do?" Damien snapped. "You think destroying my company helps our child?" Evelyn closed her eyes briefly inside the hospital room. Nathan remained across the room reviewing documents quietly while snow continued drifting outside the tall windows. "You destroyed this yourself," she said softly. Damien laughed bitterly into the phone. "You are listening to lawyers who want money. You have no idea how business works." That sentence almost made Evelyn smile. For years, Damien treated her like decoration beside his success. A quiet wife in expensive dresses smiling beside magazine covers while pretending not to notice his betrayals. He forgot Evelyn once worked in corporate finance before giving up her career to help build his public image. He forgot she understood numbers better than most executives sitting inside his boardroom right now. "You always thought I was weak," she whispered. "No, Evelyn. I thought you were loyal." The words hung between them like shattered glass. Then Nathan silently slid another tablet toward her. Live footage from inside Blackwood Global headquarters. Federal investigators carrying sealed evidence boxes through the lobby, while employees watched in stunned silence. Evelyn looked at the screen without emotion. "It is over, Damien." His breathing sharpened instantly on the other end. "Do not say that to me." But before he could continue, another voice suddenly erupted inside his office. "Damien, you need to see this right now." The call disconnected abruptly. Seconds later, every television across America switched to breaking news coverage as a leaked audio recording began playing publicly for the first time. Damien's own voice filled the airwaves. "Calm. Calculating. Move the money before my wife notices anything." Inside the hospital room, Evelyn slowly lowered the phone while reporters repeated the recording again and again. And somewhere across Manhattan, the billionaire who once controlled everything finally realized he could no longer control the story. The moment Damien's recorded voice aired across national television, the atmosphere inside Blackwood Global shifted from panic to complete collapse. Employees gathered around screens in stunned silence while reporters repeated the leaked audio every few minutes like a criminal confession nobody could ignore. Outside the headquarters building, protesters pressed against barricades holding signs demanding arrests and investigations. Camera flashes reflected endlessly across the black glass tower that once symbolized ambition and power. Now it looked like a monument waiting to fall. Inside the executive boardroom, Damien slammed both hands against the conference table hard enough to rattle crystal water glasses. "Find whoever leaked that recording," he shouted. "Now." But nobody moved. Several board members sat rigidly in silence while legal advisors whispered urgently near the far end of the room. One elderly investor removed his glasses slowly and looked directly at Damien with visible disappointment. "The Securities Commission just announced a formal investigation," he said quietly. "Our lenders are suspending credit lines." Damien stared at him in disbelief. "You are turning against me because of one manipulated recording?" Nobody answered immediately. Then the chairman finally spoke. "It is not just the recording anymore." He slid another document across the table. "Internal audit findings. Hidden transfers. Unauthorized shell corporations. Millions unaccounted for." Damien looked down at the pages while a cold realization began spreading through him for the first time all day. Someone inside his company had been helping Evelyn and Nathan long before last night. Someone close enough to access everything. Across town, Evelyn slowly walked through the quiet hospital corridor with one hand resting beneath her stomach, while nurses passed by offering careful smiles. Her contractions had stabilized, but exhaustion still lingered beneath her calm expression. Nathan walked beside her holding another stack of legal documents. "The board is preparing an emergency vote," he said. "If they remove Damien as chief executive officer today, he loses control over every remaining company asset." Evelyn paused beside a large window overlooking the snowy streets below. For several seconds she said nothing. Manhattan traffic crawled beneath gray skies while distant sirens echoed through the city. "I never wanted revenge," she admitted softly. Nathan studied her expression carefully. "Then what did you want?" Evelyn looked down at the gold wedding ring still resting on her finger. The same ring Damien slipped onto her hand 7 years ago, while promising she would never face life alone. Slowly, she removed it for the first time in months. "I wanted him to stop treating people like they were disposable." Nathan said nothing after that. He only watched as Evelyn placed the ring quietly into her coat pocket. At that exact moment, televisions across the country interrupted regular programming again with another breaking headline. Blackwood Global Board calls emergency removal vote against Damien Blackwood. Inside his office 42 floors above Manhattan, Damien watched the announcement appear live on screen while the final pieces of control slipped through his hands one by one. And for the first time since becoming a billionaire, nobody in the room looked afraid of him anymore. Rain began falling over Manhattan just before sunset, washing silver streaks across the courthouse windows while satellite news trucks crowded every block surrounding the building. Reporters stood shoulder to shoulder beneath umbrellas waiting for a glimpse of the billionaire whose empire had nearly collapsed in less than 24 hours. Inside Courtroom 7, the atmosphere felt colder than the storm outside. No shouting. No dramatic outbursts. Only silence, paperwork, and the quiet sound of keyboards clicking beneath fluorescent lights. Damien Blackwood sat beside his legal team wearing a dark charcoal suit that suddenly looked less like power and more like armor barely holding together. The exhaustion beneath his eyes could no longer be hidden by expensive tailoring or controlled posture. Across the aisle, Evelyn entered slowly beside Nathan Hale, one hand resting gently against her stomach beneath a cream-colored maternity coat. Conversations around the courtroom immediately stopped. Even reporters lowered their phones for a moment as she passed. Damien looked at her carefully for the first time all day. Not as his wife. Not as the woman he thought would always forgive him. But as the person who had quietly dismantled everything around him while he never saw it coming. The judge entered precisely at 5:42 p.m., and within minutes Nathan stood before the court presenting financial records one after another across the courtroom monitors. Offshore transfers. Hidden subsidiaries. Unauthorized property purchases linked to company funds. Each document appeared with exact dates, signatures, and account numbers. Damien's attorneys objected repeatedly, but the evidence only kept growing heavier. Then Nathan paused briefly before opening the final file. "Your Honor," he said calmly, "there is one more recording the court should hear." Damien immediately stiffened. The audio began playing through the courtroom speakers. His own voice filled the room once again, colder this time. "If Evelyn ever becomes a problem, move everything before she can touch it." Several reporters exchanged stunned glances while typing furiously into phones beneath the benches. Evelyn remained perfectly still throughout the recording, but Damien finally looked away from her. For the first time since this nightmare began, shame reached him before anger did. The judge removed her glasses slowly after the audio ended. "Mr. Blackwood," she said carefully, "the court is granting temporary control restrictions over all disputed marital assets pending full investigation." Damien closed his eyes briefly. Around him, camera shutters erupted nonstop while headlines were already being written outside the courtroom walls. "Billionaire loses control. Federal investigation expands. High-profile divorce turns catastrophic." Nathan returned quietly to Evelyn's side and handed her a small envelope. Inside rested the final approved divorce order awaiting signatures. Evelyn looked at the paper for several seconds while thunder rolled softly outside over Manhattan. 7 years of betrayal. 7 years of silence. 7 years spent shrinking herself to protect a man who never protected her. Then she signed her name with calm, steady hands. Across the courtroom, Damien watched the signature happen in real time. And in that single moment, he finally understood the one thing money could never buy back. 3 weeks later, the first snowstorm of January covered Manhattan in silence while television screens across America carried the same final headline. Blackwood Global officially filed for bankruptcy protection at 8:03 that morning. The company that once dominated financial magazines and billionaire rankings now existed only as collapsing stock charts and legal investigations. Analysts called it one of the fastest corporate downfalls in recent Wall Street history. But inside a quiet recovery room at St. Vincent Medical Center, none of that noise mattered anymore. Warm afternoon sunlight spilled softly across the floor while a newborn baby slept peacefully in Evelyn's arms beneath a pale blue blanket. The room smelled faintly of coffee, clean linen, and winter air drifting through the slightly open window. For the first time in years, Evelyn felt something unfamiliar. Peace. Not victory. Not revenge. Just peace. A small television mounted near the corner of the room replayed footage of Damien leaving federal court surrounded by reporters shouting questions he no longer answered. His expensive suits were gone now, replaced by a simple dark overcoat that hung heavily across tired shoulders. The confidence that once filled every room around him had disappeared somewhere between investigations, frozen accounts, and public humiliation. Nathan quietly muted the television before handing Evelyn a cup of tea. "You should rest," he said softly. Evelyn smiled faintly without taking her eyes off the baby. Tiny fingers curled gently around hers while soft snow continued falling outside over the city skyline. "He has your eyes," Nathan added after a moment. Evelyn looked down at her son and felt tears finally rise for the first time since everything began. Not because she missed Damien, but because she realized how close she came to raising a child inside a world built on fear, manipulation, and loneliness disguised as luxury. A soft knock interrupted the silence. One of the nurses stepped carefully into the room. "There is someone asking to see you," she said quietly. Evelyn already knew who it was before the name came. Damien stood alone outside the nursery viewing window minutes later, separated by glass and silence from the family he no longer belonged to. Dark circles shadowed his eyes while snow melted slowly across the shoulders of his coat. He looked smaller somehow. Not physically. Spiritually. Like the city had finally stopped bending around his money and power. Evelyn remained seated across the room holding the baby close against her chest. Damien stared at his son through the glass for several long seconds before finally looking toward her. No anger remained now. No arrogance. Only regret arriving far too late. He took one slow step forward as though wanting to speak, but Evelyn gently turned away before he could. The nurse quietly closed the hallway door between them with a soft click that echoed through the silence. Damien stood there alone while the reflection of falling snow covered the glass around him. Inside the warm hospital room, Evelyn kissed her son's forehead and looked out across the white Manhattan skyline glowing beneath the winter evening light. Somewhere in the distance, sirens echoed faintly through the city Damien once controlled. But none of it could reach her anymore.